Well, today on Spotlight Now, we catch up with Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke and get an update on the Ready Keiki initiative.
Plus, Carl Bonham is here from UHERO. He'll be talking about the economy. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday to Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We're going to get to the Lieutenant Governor in just a few moments, but we want to also always encourage all of you watching to be engaged in the conversations. If you have questions for our guests, you can enter your questions and comments in the Facebook section of our Hawaii News Now page, or you can do so by scanning this QR code you see here in your corner.
Yeah, we love the interaction, and we want to welcome in our first guest. Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke is joining us here live this afternoon. Thank you so much for being here.
No, it's always good to be back.
And I want to also alert our viewers, my voice sounds a little off. It sounds worse than it looks, I promise. But let's get to the news now. Let's start with Ready Keiki. We know that this is something that you have been tasked to take on, bringing preschools to Hawaii schools. Tell us about how that's going. How many classrooms are open? What are you seeing? And how many you hope to open in the fall?
It's always exciting for me to talk about Ready Keiki. So Ready Keiki is something that we initiated and we kicked off January of last year. And even then, you know, I think the idea of opening more public preschool was something that, you know, everybody generally agreed it's a good idea. But, you know, over the years, you know, it really depended on the state's commitment to build a lot more public classrooms, support the private preschools, and also support a lot of the kind of the workforce behind it. So after we established and implemented the Ready Keiki program January of last year, just within 6 months, we were able to open about 11 classrooms, which is, you know, I mean, if you think about any state initiative, I feel very proud of all the partners, including the department, including all the folks who worked on it. To be able to open something in 6 months is just kind of really incredible, and so I'm very proud of the fact. But what had happened was that all the elevation of the discussion around the preschools and having all these new preschools open and the elevation of this discussion, what happened in Nanakuli was so interesting because Nanakuli already had a preschool classroom and they were servicing about 15 kids. And all of a sudden, because of all the press around the 11 other schools opening, Nanakuli principal contacted one of the department folks that we've been working with, and they said all of a sudden we started getting a wait list. And so the Nanakuli principal said, we don't want to turn anybody down. And so we would like to expand from 15 to whatever else we can spare. And so in the meantime, the wait list had grown so big that they didn't just need 15 classrooms, 15 seats. They actually needed 2 classrooms. So very quickly, we worked with the architect, the department to expand the 15 seats to 20 and open another classroom. So within 2 months, there was an announcement that you would have 40 seats for Nanakuli. So by the time we were contacted by the principal around like fall of last year, in January of this year, we were able to service 40 kids. And the shocking thing is that even then there was a wait list. So that kind of tells you that in the leeward side, preschool services is really needed out there.
When, you know, this has been something in a program that has been discussed and debated for some time now through the legislative body, finally being implemented and your office being tasked to oversee it. There are some critics who will continue to say that this is something that the state cannot afford. And as this expands, it's going to cost more money to continue to create more classrooms and more opportunities for this pre-K initiative. What would you say to those who are skeptical about the amount of money and the overall budget that it would take to fund this initiative?
No, any worthy programs, it's really about the state's priorities, and it's about just kind of prioritizing and committing to what is really important. But, you know, as my son is now 21, and we were fortunate that we were able to send him to preschool. And I know you have a youngster, you have a second grader and some, kindergartner.
Preschoolers too, yeah,
and then,
going into kindergarten,
Yeah. So anyone with a young child, I mean, they know that the young formative years is one of the most important years. And brain development happens between 0 and 5. So by the time you bypass 5 years old and a child who have not had the opportunity to go to preschool, they enter kindergarten and there's an assessment and they could be labeled as either special needs or they could be labeled as ADHD only because they weren't prepared to sit and get instructions. And it's already giving that opportunity as just like anybody else whose parents were able to afford to send their kids to preschool. So, we kind of look at it as a social justice and issue where we are leveling the playing field for any parent to be able to send their kids to preschool. Everything in state government, you almost have to prioritize what's really important. And this is not a subject that we've been talking about just recently. We've been talking about it since I was in high school, and I am way older than the two of you folks. And can you imagine, back in the 1980s, we're talking about we need to make sure that all 3 and 4-year-olds have access to preschool. And we are at a point where we are living up to the commitment that our forefathers in the 80s have set for the state.
Now, one of the ways to get all these preschool classrooms in order is the School Facilities Authority. We know that there has been some adjustments at the top there. Chad Keone-Farias left in January. There's an interim director now. How confident are you in the ability of this authority to do its job? There's been some talk at the legislature that perhaps those responsibilities should be shifted back to the DOE. What are your thoughts on how the School Facilities Authority is working and who should actually be leading the charge to do the actual build?
For our purposes, it really doesn't matter if it's School Facilities Authority or Department of Education that ends up building it, because regardless, we have a mandate to build as many public preschools as we can, and we will work with whatever departments. And what we have done is School Facilities Authority has worked with Department of Education to open some of these classrooms. There have been changes internally at the School Facilities Authority, but the new director, Ricky Fujitani, is somebody that the School Facilities Authority worked with to build the initial 13 classrooms. So I'm very confident that whatever the internal changes will not impact our ability to build more public preschools.
Do you feel that the timeline that is being presented is somewhat challenging, though? Because when you think about this is a program, obviously, and you shared some of the successes already about getting this up to speed so quickly. But when you're trying to create something new, oftentimes there's a lot of things that go into not only just the physical classroom, but finding personnel, staffing, and all those other issues. Are you confident that the timeline that's being presented and the escalated and the need for it is going to be able to be met by this department and those who are ultimately in charge of it?
Yeah. So I hold this program in the highest standards, and I challenge each of the departments that are working with us on the Ready Kiki initiative to try to do their best and to break down barriers and break down challenges to achieve this goal. And the state has mandated that we provide public, the access, not a universal preschool model, but universal access to try to get as many 3 and 4-year-olds into some kind of a preschool setting by year 2032. 2032 is not an impossible task. And if you think about it, half of the kids right now don't have an opportunity to go to preschool. But so the fact that we were able to build so many, even 13, in such a quick time frame, and with our time frame of trying to build about 50 a year, about 40 to 50 a year, that's not an insurmountable task. And for, I think, anything in state government, we cannot look at it in a linear way. We cannot just say, okay, we're going to build all these preschools and our job is done. We have to think about everything. We have to think about how does this impact private preschools? How does it impact the workforce? So part of the Ready Keiki initiative is to think about all those different challenges and tackle those issues and then sort it out.
When we've spoken about this before, one of the things that you had been thinking about was where to actually put the preschools. Do we put them in the neighborhoods where the kids are coming from, or do we put it in the areas where the parents are working? Tell us about where we can expect the next sort of tranche to open and how you're thinking about that placement.
So after we successfully opened 13 classrooms, the next set is we are trying to open 44 new classrooms for August, and those have been identified. So if you go to readykeiki.org, it will give you a list of the 44 classrooms. Recently, I went to an event and I ran into a woman from Windward side, and she told me, you know, I'm so glad you're doing preschool expansion, and I have a grandson who is 3, and we're having such a hard time finding a preschool in our area, and the fact that our grandson may not be able to benefit from it, but you know, the fact that you're opening opportunities for free preschool is so terrific. And I asked her, oh, okay, what area in Windward? And then I told her, actually, we are opening one in Windward. And the person was just so grateful because sometimes they have no idea that there's a free preschool opening in their area. And so I told her, well, one of the school is Ben Parker right in Windward side. And so if you look at readykeiki.org, 44 is a huge number, and you know, we encourage parents, or we encourage people who who have preschool age, or you know, friends, or you know, your grandson or granddaughter is in the preschool age. You should just go on the website and see if there's one opening, and they're already accepting applications.
And how are you, just if you can update us on staffing wise, have you been able to meet the demands as this program continues to grow, making sure that there are equipped teachers and educators to fill these roles?
Yeah, so that's one thing that we were worried about initially. That's why we didn't want to open, in as much as, you know, if our task is, okay, let's try to open up 100 or 200 or 400 very quickly. It's easy for one thing to just build out, but then it's another thing to make sure that we have enough teachers, teacher assistant, and then, you know, they're in locations where it's convenient for the parents. So one of the things that we've been working with is, along with Chaminade and the University of Hawaii, we're working on a kind of a dedicated early education or preschool path. And so one of the program is in partnership with Kamehameha Schools, and that's the Mu'o Scholarship. The Mu'o Scholarship, along with Chaminade University, have offered 50 scholarships last year. Within few weeks of announcement that they will get full tuition scholarship if you want to go into early education or education degree, 250 people apply. Apparently this year they're going to open the second tranche of 50 free scholarship in this again, the early education and education pathway. And apparently there are about 250 people again. So the idea that people don't want to get in this field is not true. What we need to figure out is, how do you get rid of some of these challenges, whether it's a monetary barrier or different challenges, and just sort it out. University of Hawaii is also providing tuition waivers if you want to go into this field.
Oh, I know we want to talk to you about a lot of happenings at the Ledge, but before we move off this topic, I want to key in on something that you said, and that you call this a social justice issue. Tell us a little bit more about why you call it that, how you see it that, what this means, particularly for working parents.
Yeah. You know, if you think about it, as I said, about 50% of our preschool kids are not going to preschool just because their parents just cannot afford to send their kids to preschool. And Yunji, you know, I mean, you have a preschool age child, and in order to send your kid to preschool, or your child to preschool, it costs anywhere between, you know, $1,200 to about, sometimes as much as $2,000 a month.
Don't remind me.
Yeah. So if you think about it, you know, in addition to rent and everything else you got to pay for preschool, some parents are opting not to go back to work just because they just can't afford it. And if you think about that, you know, it's preschool is not just about getting kids ready to learn. It's giving working families the opportunity to send their child to a safe learning environment while you can go back to work and provide the needs for your family. So this is like really multifaceted in trying to take care of a lot of our working families.
Well, this is a critical time in the state legislature as conferencing is getting underway right now with some of those bills that are continuing to stay alive and move through the legislative session. One bill that did die was legalizing the recreational use of marijuana. We had the governor on this program when that bill actually died, and he noted that he would look for ways to maybe expand the ability for the Department of Health to expand on the already allowed medical marijuana program and providing more opportunities for people to go and find ways to get carded and be legalized through that sort of pathway. What are your thoughts on just the whole process with this legalization of recreational marijuana? Do you think this was a good call by the legislature, and your overall thoughts about maybe what the governor has said about his plan?
Yeah, you know, what became pretty evident this year was that as the legislature get more comfortable in delving into the issue of recreational marijuana, at the same time, more questions come up. So for instance, legalizing itself is not just simple as just legalizing, because it is still a controlled substance. So how do you put guardrails around it? So who get to sell it? How do you get to sell it, even the taxation issue, and then how do you deal with licensing? I know Department of Health still continue to struggle with the medical marijuana program. So I think one of the things that became very evident is, okay, how do you roll this program out? And it's not just as simple as just legalizing. So I think it was a kind of a healthy discussion for the legislature to delve into. But, you know, in the future years, we expect more discussion around this.
And what do you think about the governor's idea of changing the statute to allow, you know, right now you need a certain level of conditions to qualify for a medical marijuana license. What he told us is he would just allow any doctor or nurse practitioner to write a prescription without having to meet any of those mandated causes.
I think even that, you would probably need statutory changes, as he recognized, so that still needs to go through the legislature. And over the years, I think we'll have a lot of discussion of what is kind of the most smartest and the best way that we can roll out this program. And, you know, we have the benefit of looking to other states that have legalized, so we can learn from some of their mistakes and some of the things that they thought was benefit, so we can look at all those things and then come together.
I want to ask you, Civil Beat and the New York Times released an investigation last week that has made national headlines, obviously, about political donations, you know, describing what they call late night parties that sound like pretty elaborate fundraisers that are legal, perhaps, or are legal as far as you can tell from the article, but make people uncomfortable. I'm curious about your reaction to that article and what you think about the way money is raised here in Hawaii.
Yeah. I think anytime we talk about, you know, how do we do different type of campaign finance reform, it's a positive thing, because every time there is discussion about, okay, how do we ensure that there are safeguards and guardrails so that we have trust in government, the people who we elect are making the best choices based on policy and not based on different type of, you know, special interests or politics. I think in this situation, one of the things that is pretty clear is Civil Beat was able to, or, you know, Blaze Level and the New York Times was able to do a lot of research, because a lot of those contributions and a lot of those items that they were able to research is transparent through campaign finance reports. So I think that's a good thing. The more transparency we have, it allows the public to make their own judgment. But I think, you know, as we are having discussion about campaign spending, reform, and then as we are talking, even this session, we talked about full public financing as an alternative. The one missing component that we are not having a robust discussion is, how do you control dark money? Because as you can see, you know, even in my own race, I was the focal point of the attacks from a dark money super PAC. And so one of the things that we really need to have a handle on is, how do you control all these dark money? Because dark money is not transparent. We don't know where they're getting their money from, how they're spending it, and then how do they influence some of the legislation and some of the people who are making policy. So that continues to be a big top of mind and concern.
Do you think realistically that, a full public financing reform or allowing some sort of mechanism that would pay for all elections is realistic? I mean, it's something that has been discussed, but it would take a lot of political will to pass. What are your thoughts of the real, that being a realistic option in Hawaii's political landscape?
So even for full public financing, there has, unless you put money behind it, it's not going to be workable. So for instance, if we just commit to, a few $100,000 or even a few $1 million, for the, some of these races are costing as much as $200,000 for some of these, even not even at the governor or lieutenant governor's races. So I think you have to put money behind it and you have to commit. There are ways that some type of a public financing model could work, but there has to be, again, going back to dark money. So for instance, if you were to restrict yourself and say, okay, we're not going to spend as much, or we're going to put caps on ourselves in order to run a campaign, there has to be either some type of equal match if a dark money comes in to attack you or to play in that race. I think there has to be some fairness and equity to address some dark money influences.
I think this is the last one we'll ask you on this, but the report found that nearly $1 out of every $5 donated to politicians comes from people tied to doing business with state and local government. Now, that's not illegal, but it does feel, it calls into a lot of question about the motivation of the people who are donating and the politicians who are accepting this money. Do you think there should be a way to limit that kind of contribution?
Yeah, I think currently the state law has it where if you have a current contract with the state, you cannot donate. And then, perhaps that's something that, the legislature should revisit again. The article was able to get some of these information because there's transparency. And then maybe one of the things that we should really look at is how do you have better reporting? How do you have better transparency? And I think any kind of conversation around this, it's a positive effort for us to build that trust with our public officials and within government.
You have been in charge of the state's finance for some time as the chair of the Finance Committee of the House before being elected into this role. I wanted to get your thoughts about what we're seeing this legislative session. A lot of money and attention being put to Maui and the recovery efforts there. But when you look long term at the amount of support that they're going to need and the amount of money of the overall state budget is going to have to be allocated moving forward to recovery efforts, how do you think the state can continue to support the recovery efforts in a state where we're talking about finances and we're talking about departments needing more money? How do you think that all balances out now that we're adding such a large expense that's going to be going on for some time now?
Right. So, and then this year, the emergency appropriation is around $300 million, and the governor is doing really great in making sure that we have a lot of permanent housing for Maui. And it's great to see him and his team, along with Maui County folks, working together to take care of the needs of the county that has gone through such devastation. But you're right, this isn't just a one-time thing. This is, years in the making, and for the recovery will be long, and it is going to be hard. And we continue to, on behalf of the state, we continue to work with the legislature and with our Maui County partners to ensure that, we will be there to support them.
Last year at the end of session, we saw what I think I would politely call growing pains, right, at the end, and kind of a mad dash. Do you think things are going to go a little smoother this year?
I think so. I think they're about to close the budget pretty soon as we speak, hopefully. And so as the budget is that, they still have about 4 days, 3.5 days to sort out many of the bills. What the legislature has done this year was really interesting because they were able to identify and put focus on Maui so that some of the money bills that they thought they could afford in the beginning just kind of dropped off because they were laser focused on the priorities, and they realized, hey, we have to dedicate a lot of money for Maui and other priority needs.
One of the things that we've also know that you've been taxed with is just the broadband initiatives throughout the state, and something that was made evident during COVID, just how far behind the state of Hawaii is, and it has become a priority, I know, of yours as well as the administration. What information can you provide us or updates about that initiative as a whole, and some of the things that you're working on to increase connectivity within the state?
Yeah, so the Connect Kako initiative is going really well. I mean, we are really fortunate that we were able to get basically $500 million worth of federal funds to increase broadband resiliency and redundancy within the state. We want to make sure that, we go into communities, even when you're driving out to Naalehu on the Big Island, there's a stretch of areas, about an hour, sometimes hour and a half, that there's no internet service. And even on Hana, there are remote areas that you can't reach. And what became even evident is during even the wildfires, connectivity was so crucial. So we want to make sure that there are alternatives, and we want to make sure that we reach many of the communities. There will be a lot of exciting news coming ahead. So we are in the planning stages, but there are a lot of like exciting announcements that will be coming forward.
Now, this is your second session now in this role. I'm just curious, are you enjoying this? Do you like being on this side of the fence, or do you miss being in the fray downstairs?
No, I really enjoy being LG, and I really enjoy being LG, especially during this time as I see my former colleagues struggling to put the budget together. And but I give so much credit to the legislators, because it's really hard. They have such a short amount of time to put basically a $17 billion budget together and work on all these bills at the same time. So, because I've been there and going through the struggles, and during this time, I would be up at, wee hours, and then wouldn't be going to sleep until 2 or 4. But I give them so much credit right now.
Yeah, a lot of sleepless nights going on at the state capitol right now. Well, Lieutenant Governor Sylvia Luke, thank you so much for joining us, for spending some time, and for giving us an update on all the things that you're working on. We'll be right back right after this with an update from UHERO Executive Director Carl Bonham. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Well, welcome back to Spotlight Now. Today, we are focusing this next half of our show really on the economy, and joining us here now, Executive Director of UHERO, Carl Bonham. Thank you so much for joining us, Carl. Great to see you again. Want to briefly just start off talking about the impacts of the Maui wildfire and how it's impacted our state economy. What can you tell us about how things are projected and looking now that we have some numbers, we see some of the residual effects of what this has done to the economy, not only for the state, but for Maui County as a whole?
And it's really a tale of two different economies, right? The Maui economy is basically in recession after losing roughly 50% of their visitors very, very quickly after the fire. They've recovered about half of those losses. And so, average daily census, the average number of visitors on the island before the fire was around 65, 66,000. It fell to 33,000, and it's recovered about 15,000. So that's a lot of people to not be there, right? And to not be spending money in restaurants and bars and activities, and that's actually where you're seeing most of the job losses and the lost income is primarily in food service. And then if you look at the rest of the state, essentially Maui lost about 7,000 jobs very, very quickly and is currently down about 5,000 from the wildfire. But the rest of the state grew more than that. And so statewide jobs are almost 1% above where they were before the wildfires, because some of that is because visitors went to other islands and we had some growth there, but it's also just the natural growth in the rest of the state, right? So it's a very, very different story.
That's so interesting. So from a state level, if you're DBED or, trying to manage economic policy, if you have one county that is in recession and the rest of the state doing well, how do you balance that? Do you essentially have to have the other counties carry Maui?
Sure. Yeah. Maui County, the people of Maui need our support, and this is a single state. And if it was Oahu or the Big Island that had gone through a disaster, that's what we would do. And you're seeing that, and these are the deliberations that are going on at the Capitol. Is how do we allocate the limited resources that we have to help Maui as much as possible, but not leave other important elements behind.
As a whole, when you're looking at just, as you're talking about the state economy, there still seems to be a sense both locally and nationally that a recession is just around the corner, and that there are many people who are afraid of maybe making investments, these high interest rates. How do you think overall, just as Hawaii, because at times we are much different from what's happening nationally, how would you describe what's happening here with our economy and looking forward towards a potential decline or recession or any impacts because of these high interest rates?
That's a tough question, and it's one that we've sort of been grappling with over the last few years. And actually, we predicted a recession for the U.S. Probably a year and a half ago. We expected a recession during 2023, as was true for many prognosticators and economists, and we were all wrong, right? And now the consensus is more of no recession for the nation as a whole, and maybe even no soft landing. We just keep on growing. And the strength of the U.S. economy has surprised pretty much all observers, with particularly the second half of last year. The growth of the U.S. economy was gangbusters, and consumer spending was very, very strong. And that's held up Hawaii's economy in the face of this downturn on Maui, because U.S. visitors have continued to come and Japanese visitors have continued to come. Obviously, there's some concern now with rates having gone back up again, right? And it's primarily impacting revolving debt, car loans, things like that, and of course housing. But the big picture is that we still expect Hawaii's economy to continue to grow slowly, very, very slowly, for the next several years.
So given that, and that we didn't have the recession and that we might not even have the soft landing as you describe, why is there that disconnect between the perception of the economy and the reality as you describe?
So there's a whole bunch of reasons, and one really important one is the increasing costs of everything, the inflation that we've seen nationally, and those nationally and in Hawaii, gas prices are always sort of top of mind. Gas prices, rents, food prices, right? Places where we've seen enormous increases in costs. Gas prices have come down. Unfortunately, they're going back up again, but those are sort of in your face as a consumer, right? Every time you go into the grocery store and you pay an arm and a leg for whether it's eggs or milk or chicken or whatever it is, that's what you remember. And even though for the average person, their wages went up faster than their cost of living, right? They still feel the pain of the price increases more than they feel the gain of the wage increases. And that's a big piece of it. And the other thing is, even though inflation's come down, right, prices haven't come down for most goods. Unless you're shopping for used cars or in some cases new cars, you're not seeing prices actually go down.
I mean, is this a problem of psychology that
Yes.
we tend to be, you know, there's a negative bias,
Yep.
we talk about in the news business,
Yep.
right? That you tend to gravitate to the
It's your
stories.
fault.
It's all our fault. But that you tend to gravitate toward the news that
Yep.
is negative, right? Or it stays with you more, or a compliment doesn't stick the way criticism does. It's the same thing.
It is definitely psychology, and in economics we have what we call behavioral economics, which basically melds psychology and economics more closely. And I mentioned that consumers feel the pain of what's salient of that. Particularly, that's why gas prices are so important, because people are filling up once a week. And when you get a pay raise, it's because you're a good worker. Even though most of that pay raise was because overall price increases, right? You're getting the pay raise because of the inflation, but you feel that as you've earned it, and you feel the other as a punishment, and that's a big piece of it.
I want to ask you about the minimum wage here in the state of Hawaii, as that took into effect, that increase, and we're going to know over the years that will continue to move up for the overall minimum wage. How do you think that has impacted business overall and just the overall economy looking, or economy, or has it?
So our take on it is that the wage, in the first place, the increases that happened at the beginning of this multi-year increase in the minimum wage were probably not large enough to be binding. In other words, the vast majority of workers were already earning more than those minimum wages. And unfortunately, some of the most important workers, like childcare workers, were some of the areas where maybe you would see an impact. But in aggregate, the increases, and remember, those came into play after the post-pandemic labor shortages that drove wages up so much. And so it's not clear to me that they're having much of an impact at all until we get out several more years.
I want to go back to Maui for just a second. The governor has spoken to us about his concern about what he's calling a housing cliff, that when these federal dollars run out, whether it's a year or 2 years, that suddenly there will be a multitude of families who have been used to getting rent covered, suddenly not covered, and the landlords are getting paid at a very, very high rate, in some cases 3 times market rate, to make sure that fire survivors have a place to live. What do you see happening to the housing market in Maui, given all the variables that are there now?
So it's really kind of simple. Either we build housing and enough to replace all the housing that was destroyed plus some, or we face permanently higher rents and prices, right? Because Maui was already in a severe housing shortage and a severe housing crisis. You look at the west side. So UHERO has a housing dashboard. You can find it on our website. And I was looking at the data before I came on. 58% of the homes on the west side of Maui were owned by non-residents, and 37% of the homes on the west side. These are estimates. They're not perfect numbers. 37% of them were used for short-term vacation rentals. Okay, and then we took and destroyed thousands and thousands of homes. Right, we absolutely have to rebuild those, and and we have to rebuild. We have to rebuild on the west side, and we have to rebuild homes that, you know, the people who are renting in Lahaina can afford to rent. And if we don't, many more people will continue to leave the islands, and the businesses will struggle to find workers. And you know, because the owner of a short-term vacation rental that is, you know, getting thousands and thousands of dollars from FEMA isn't going to suddenly be able to rent that property for $800 a month when the FEMA money goes away. If they are required to not make it a short-term vacation rental, then presumably most likely would end up on the market as a for sale unit, and it'll still be too expensive for most workers on Maui.
And so we
have to build housing.
And so we are potentially looking at this housing cliff. You know,
yes.
if when the federal dollars dry out, and these people are these long-term renters are expecting that same amount of money coming in.
We are facing a cliff. It's not inevitable, right? If we build enough housing units, so someone's living in a former short-term vacation rental that's being covered by FEMA, you build housing that they can afford to pay based on the salaries that they're making in whatever their business or job is on Maui. They transition out of that vacation rental into that permanent housing that presumably will be subsidized in some form, at least to get it built. And then that vacation rental either goes back to tourism, or if policy changes, it could be made available for long-term rental at a very expensive price, or it goes back into the for sale market.
Do you see the political will to actually make that happen? And what you're talking about is building thousands of units at a pretty fast clip.
Yeah, so we know that there are over 1,000 units in the sort of interim or temporary housing pipeline from the plans that we've seen for whether it's DHS or CNHA or Holomu or others who are providing short-term housing, and 400 or 500 of those could come online as early as June or July. So we're moving in the right direction, but whether we get 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 over the next year and a half, that's a much bigger question. I think the political will there is there in some corners. I'm not sure if it's shared everywhere, right? So obviously, some people would prefer that you build no housing, and we don't have any growth, and that we require that people who own short-term vacation rentals not use them for short-term vacation rentals. That won't necessarily solve the housing problem, because those properties won't necessarily be accessible to people once the FEMA money goes away financially.
I want to get your take, a question I asked the Lieutenant Governor as well about, just looking at the state overall budget and the amount of resources that are now going towards Maui, knowing long-term that this is going to be something that the state will continue to have to put efforts and money towards and allocation towards moving forward. How do you think that will impact the overall economy and the overall state budget? When it always seems like there seems to be people competing over interests and what money and what things get funded, how do you think this impacts the state budget moving forward? So,
this is not unique. We go through there are needs across the entire state, and the tough job that the legislators have to deal with is prioritizing and deciding what gets funded and what doesn't. Fortunately, we continue to have pretty solid revenue growth, and I think the council's forecast for fiscal year growth for this year is 4% growth, which is in the neighborhood of $300 million of revenue, that over and above what we had last year. Current tax revenue collections are fiscal year to date are more like 5%, and so. I'm not suggesting that we're going to grow our way out of this problem. We're going to have to make tough decisions, but I think it's manageable.
Let's talk about the individual. If you're a worker out there who wants to find a job, are we in a good place? Is it a good time to find a job? Is it a hard time to find a job? And where are the jobs needed? Because when we talk to employers, and Rick Blangiardi's been on here, the chief of police has been on here, they say we need the workers. Yep. So where are the workers?
Well, so like everything else, it's complicated. Since the pandemic, we've lost about 16,000 people out of our labor force, right? So the labor force has shrunk, the population has shrunk. That plays a role in the fact that the mayors and many other businesses have a hard time finding workers. Where we're seeing the most job growth, where most recently, has been in contracting. Construction jobs have soared. On Oahu, construction jobs are if they're not at an all-time high, they're very, very close to it. A lot of that is because of federal spending at Pearl Harbor and elsewhere, and increasingly that will also be a role on Maui, right? As we get the debris removal finished and we make good progress there, you'll start to see infrastructure work going in. So construction jobs. This is a good time if you want to work in the trades. It's not quite as strong of a labor market as it was, go back to summer of 2021 when there was something like 50,000 job openings, and there were 2 job openings for every unemployed person or more than that. It really is we're sort of finished with the pandemic recovery, and the labor market has really stabilized to where we're continuing to see job growth, and there are jobs available, but it's not as short as it was pre-pandemic. But each industry and each sector is different, right? And the challenges that the mayors have and the city has is often that their salaries haven't kept up with the private sector wage gains.
Well, I just want to follow up on one thing that you said, and kind of building on what Ryan said about that, the interest rates, and you're talking about construction being in high demand. What is that going to do to our housing cost if you have, every person who is in the trades in that kind of demand, and now we're going to see a lot of building on Maui.
Yep.
If you're a person who's building a house anywhere, not necessarily even in Maui, what's that going to do to your cost?
They're going to go up. I mean, it's inevitable that when you go through, anytime you rapidly, increase building activity or demand for construction materials and workers, you end up with some wage increases and some cost increases, and it ends up balancing out. Some people decide not to move forward with projects and with construction of homes because they think the costs are too high.
One of the industries also that we know that you are tracking, we briefly touched upon, is tourism overall. I'm wondering if you can just give us a glimpse of what's happening there in the state's largest industry, how much the state relies on that. We've seen some reports that visitor spending is down. What can you tell us about the tourism industry as a whole and really the state of where we're at?
So, I would describe where we are as being in a pretty good place considering what we've been through. We have largely completed the recovery from the pandemic. It's not, even Japanese visitors, if you look at their average daily census, they're almost completely recovered. Not the number of visitors, but they're still staying longer. And actually, that's probably on Oahu only. But what we've seen with the Maui wildfires was, of course, we lost thousands and thousands of primarily U.S. visitors to Maui, but many of them went to the other islands, particularly in the fall. And so we saw pretty strong growth on all the other islands. And you could kind of describe total U.S. visitors to the state as basically flat since around the time of the wildfires, or since last fall. And meanwhile, we've got continued growth in recovery of Japanese visitors. We're up to almost 60% of pre-pandemic levels. So, we'd like to see that stronger, but it's making a big difference, particularly on Oahu. So, visitor spending, usually what happens after you have a bounce back from a crisis is that visitor spending sort of goes sideways. And so we measure visitor spending in real dollars. We try and take out the effects of inflation. And when you look at this in real terms, you're really talking about no growth. So, that's not a bad thing. We'd like to have them spend even more money. But one thing we haven't talked about is that we are experiencing a run-up in inflation in Hawaii that was very much unanticipated. And so inflation rates well over 4%. Over the last 4 or 5 months, which has been kind of a surprise.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
This is actually quite a puzzle, one that several economists, we've been emailing back and forth going, what the heck is going on with this data? And it's primarily being driven by measurement of rent increases. And this is Oahu, right? So for Hawaii, we only have one consumer price index, and it's really, they call it urban Hawaii, but it's Oahu. And so we're seeing since October, November, high single-digit growth in rent, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which most economists and most observers kind of have a hard time believing. And that's the biggest piece of the consumer price index. And so our inflation measures are rising much faster than they are for the U.S. as a whole. And that's the first time that's happened. One possibility that could help to explain that is if you've had thousands of people leave Maui and come to Oahu, where there are jobs and where there is housing, that could be driving rents.
How will we figure that out? I mean, you don't have a geo-tracker on every resident.
No, it's really hard, and it's another area that we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how are we going to determine in the near term, right? Before it's going to take us. So next summer of 2025, we'll get the data for population by county for 2024. So that'll be the first time that we'll have sort of an official number. So we have several projects in the works where we're trying to estimate how many people have left the islands. Our forecast is that we've already lost 3,000-4,000 people from Maui. And that's consistent with drop in labor force.
To the continent or to?
We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah. Certainly, I mean, we think many of them have stayed in state, but we really don't know. Yeah. Hopefully, in coming months, we will have, we'll be releasing a report that provides some harder data, some more hard data on that subject.
I'm not sure that you'll know the answer to this, but I want to just get your opinion, I guess, on when the state is in a position where we do have a surplus and money has been going to, say, funds like the rainy day fund.
Yep.
How much does that increase or contributions to rainy day funds and other things help with the overall projection of where we are at as state? Because I imagine that if there are these surpluses and if we're able to, say, put money aside into these other long-term funds, that it also shows that the state is in a pretty good position. So is that a measure of how we're gauging the state of our own economy?
It's certainly a measure that bond rating agencies look at, right? So and that's one of the reasons I think that the state hasn't been pulling money out of the rainy day fund, even though it's raining, right? It's, if the wildfire isn't a rainstorm, that's not exactly a good metaphor, but if that's not a reason for taking money out of the rainy day fund, I don't know what is. But in this case, we didn't have to, right? So the governor decided that we would postpone a payment to an early payment for healthcare benefits and retirement benefits, and that was one source of funds. The ability to replenish that rainy day fund does reflect well on the state's finances, and as a result, to the best of my knowledge, we haven't seen any downgrade of our financial situation.
Well, before we let you go, we're almost out of time, but love a final thought. Where do you think, where are we heading? Should we, as a collective, feel good about our economy? Because, it sounds like kind of a mixed bag. We feel bad, but it's actually good.
Well,
depending on where you obviously are on the scale.
Yeah, I mean, if you lost your home and your business on Maui versus, someone whose construction business or whatever their industry is on another island is thriving, they're very, very different situations, right? I think for the overall state economy, we're doing remarkably well considering what we've been through, right? Whether it was the pandemic followed by the wildfire, actually we're doing pretty well.
Okay, well, Carl Bonham, thank you so much for the update. We love hearing from you. He knows everything.
He does.
Stay with us. Spotlight Now continues right after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great to hear from both of our guests. Of course, we started off this conversation talking with the Lieutenant Governor, getting an update on the Ready Keiki initiative. You heard from the Lieutenant Governor of the overall confidence she has in this program, the need for it overall, and saying that more expansion is on the way.
Yeah, 44 new classrooms, she says, by August, which will be a boon to so many families throughout the state. And then we heard from Carl Bonham kind of explaining a mixed bag on the economy, but overall doing very well. But he said, you know, Maui County specifically basically in a recession, the rest of the state kind of bringing it along, and that's something that we will have to do to support our friends and neighbors there, it sounds like, for years to come.
Yeah, and an interesting moment because I think the overall consensus, as you alluded to, whether it be in our community here locally or nationally, is that things are pretty tight, that the economy may be in a bad position, but you heard from him that considering everything that we've gone through, that things are looking pretty significantly well. We also heard from him about those tourism numbers. First time I'm hearing about the increase in Japanese arrivals, because that has been a topic that many have talked about for some time, those tourism officials, about where things are at with the Japanese market. And you heard from him saying that we're beginning to see sort of that rebound and those guests staying for a longer period of time as well.
Yeah, and a good time to be in the trades. The construction industry really ramping up, and more of that to come. We have, of course, the build at Pearl Harbor, and of course what's going to be happening on Maui in the years and months to come. Coming up next week, we're going to be talking about regenerative tourism.
That's right. We're going to be focusing in, of course, as we talked about the importance of tourism to the economy and how the state officials and those in charge in the tourism industry are trying to find that balance between regenerative tourism as well as those in the Hawaiian community and preserving much of what makes Hawaii so unique.
Yeah, so we look forward to that conversation. We're going to leave you now with a beautiful shot of the Honolulu skyline. We hope you have a fantastic week. Until next time, take care and aloha.